Hello again. I'm sorry if you've had some interruptions in our feed today. We're back on the agenda now. Next up is a live panel discussion that will continue the theme we started earlier today of looking at economic trends. I'm going to hand over to my colleague now, Ian Winefess, who's going to chair the debate.
Hello and welcome to this panel discussion on project investment. I'm Ian Winefast, the Deputy Editor of Construction News. We've just heard about the economic rebound and, it was less than a year and a half ago that Prime Minister Boris Johnson gave his famous speech about building back better and building back greener after the pandemic, when he explained how central construction is to his future vision for the economic recovery. The stage was then set for construction's starring role in our economic recovery. So is it all easy and plain sailing for the next few years for the industry? Of course. While the Prime Minister's main focus was on public investment, the private sector plays a huge role in this too, driving as it does billions in projects and schemes all over the UK. But that investment is dependent on the right conditions being in place for it to happen. In this session, we will be discussing the picture for project investment over the next few years, what the risks are in this area, and what contractors can do to help. I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Robert Allen, Development Director at Muse Developments, Wes Earlham, Director of Urban Regeneration at Legal & General Capital, John Mulryan, Group Managing Director of Ballymore, by Lynn Smith, Development Director at Europa Capital, Matthew Vickerstaff, Deputy Chief Executive and Head of Project Finance at the Infrastructure and Projects Authority, and Matt Voice, Executive Director of Construction at Quintain. If I could just ask each of you to introduce yourself and very briefly describe your role and your company. And Wes, if you could introduce yourself and describe your role.
Yeah, thanks, Ian. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm the Director of Urban Regeneration at Legal & General Capital. We're responsible for a wide range of mixed-use projects across the UK. We've got schemes from Newcastle, Sunderland, Sheffield to Cardiff. We also have a number of joint venture partnerships with Oxford University, Bruntwood, which is a Bruntwood SciTech life science vehicle, as well as other partners such as Schroders. Our investments span all real estate asset classes, so residential, commercial, retail and leisure. Thank you.
Thanks. And John?
Hi everyone, my name is John Mulryan. I'm the Group Managing Director of Ballymore. Ballymore, we're an international development business. We work at the moment mainly within the UK and Ireland, and within that probably 95% of everything we do is within London and the greater Dublin area. And yeah, so I manage the group and manage operations across both of those businesses.
And Lynn?
Good morning. I'm Lynn Smith. I'm Development Director at Europa Capital. We're a pan-European private equity investor, 75% owned by Mitsubishi Real Estate in Tokyo. And I've got responsibility for managing investment across all our development projects in Europe, the UK, Ireland and the Nordics. And our focus is on core and value add as a fund.
And Matthew Vickerstaff?
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Matthew Vickerstaff, Deputy CEO of the Infrastructure and Projects Authority. Just in a nutshell, we sit at the heart of government, reporting into the HM Treasury and the Cabinet Office, and we look after the government's major project portfolio and are responsible for government's project delivery function. So that's actually about 14,000 people across government from a functional perspective, all focused on delivering government's major projects. Thank you.
And Matt Joyce?
Yeah, afternoon. Hi, Matt Voice, Executive Director of Construction at Quintain. Quintain is a developer operator of build to rent apartments. We have a large land holding of 85 acres around the National Stadium at Wembley, delivering, when complete, 10,000 homes, of which we probably delivered about 5,000, with the remaining 5,000 to be delivered over the next 5 years.
And do we have Robert Allen? I think we couldn't hear you at the start, Robert, if you're there. If you could just, if you are there, if you could introduce yourself and your company. I think we might have a bit of an issue with the connection to Robert there, who's from Muse Development. But thank you, everyone. Hopefully, Robert will be back with us shortly. The first question I'd like to ask, and let's start with Matthew Vickerstaff from the IPA, because in your role you go with the huge public pipeline ahead. David, it's Robert. Sorry, it's still a bad line. We'll come back to you in a couple of minutes. Firstly, if I could just ask Matthew Vickerstaff.
I think my screen is frozen, I'm afraid. Can you hear me?
Okay. Maybe if you try logging off and back in again, that might help things. Matthew Vickerstaff from the IPA. In your role, you, as you mentioned, you're concerned with the huge government pipeline coming up and all the work that's ahead. In your view, what is the picture for project investment at the moment, and how confident should investors be in UK projects?
Thank you, Ian. I think you started with your introduction about the ambition of this government to invest in infrastructure, and in particular net zero, resilient, green, efficient infrastructure as well. Back in September, we issued the National Infrastructure Construction Pipeline, which totals around 650 billion of investment in infrastructure over the next 10 years. And in my mind, when I look at that from a construction company perspective, tier ones, tier twos, tier threes, and the broader supply chain, that represents the addressable market. You know, that 650 billion of pipeline is a really attractive opportunity to invest in skills, capability, improve the overall delivery of construction, so that we can do things more efficiently and, frankly, make, in a post-COVID world where we recognise challenging supply chains, issues around workforce, etc. If we are more productive and more efficient in delivering, then we can do more and make the money go further. And a sister publication that we had at the same time was our Transforming Infrastructure Performance Roadmap, which focuses in on how we can be more productive. So things like using digital twins, like using modern methods of construction, being more efficient in terms of having hands-on tools more, and being more productive in the construction workplace on site, etc., or if need be, off-site. But I recognise the public, that 650 billion is only part of the show. We work with our colleagues in Homes England, and I recognise there are private developers here as well who've got real estate and also housing ambitions and work as well. So I think it's a really strong period for the construction industry. I think I would just flag that desire, and frankly, post-COVID and throughout COVID, we saw very collaborative working with the construction industry to actually start that transformation process. And that is something that we're really interested in continuing to debate, and our TIP 2030 roadmap is very much focused on that. But with those opening comments in, I'll send it back to you.
Thank you. Lynn Smith from Europa Capital. I wondered if, the investment perspective, you saw the picture as positive that. And also, I mentioned the Prime Minister's speech at the start. Do the recent sort of changes of long-term plans have any bearing on how you see things?
Gosh, that's a big question. I mean, from the investment perspective, you know, we're still actively investing in all our key sectors: residential, build to rent, senior living, logistics, and offices. And you know, it's a difficult one because yes, what Matthew was just saying about investment in infrastructure is absolutely key for us, because without it, we can't actually deliver any of our own targets. We need to see investment in utilities. We need to see investment in broadband connectivity and city centres. And we need to see investment in transport systems as well. And all of these things are key to us making investment decisions, choosing locations. We look at all of that and where the investment is getting placed around the UK and around Europe. And that drives our research team to have a look and make key decisions as to where we're then going to invest our clients' money. So it's a big subject. You know, because we're a sort of pan-European fund, it does mean we're interacting and looking at the whole political playbook, not just the UK. So it's been an interesting one for us the last sort of 12-18 months, and making decisions as to where we want to invest our clients' money. But we are still very focused on city centre locations, very specific areas of growth. And I think that comes back to what Matthew was saying about infrastructure being key, because without it, you know, you can't make that transition to delivering an asset in a location without those investment without it happening. And you know, and I hark back to HS2 and the investment that's happening on that as well. Although obviously the decision not to move into and do the second stage is disappointing, particularly for people that have already making decisions to invest in areas around Leeds. You know, that there is a big throwback from that from an investment perspective. But yeah.
Mm-hmm. Robert Allen, I think we can see and hear you now. I wanted to ask, I mean, if you could say a couple of words about Muse, but also I know you work with lots of different partners, and I wonder if how you saw the development picture and the investment picture in general at the moment.
Thank you. Hope you can hear me now. It's like IT issue. So I'm Rob Allen. I work for Muse Development. So, you know, we're one of the country's leading regeneration and mixed use specialists. We're a UK buyer, so we only focus on the UK. You know, we traditionally work in partnership with existing landowners and a lot of local authority-led work. We have a partnership with the English Cities Fund, with Legal and General, again with Homes England, which again allows us to take a larger scale approach and a longer term approach to regeneration of areas. So I think it's all about working in partnership. It is also about, I think the point just being raised just now of where transport infrastructure is going into, which can help become part of the catalyst for regeneration. I mean, we can all do our bit in build to rent, private residential, affordable, creating great public realm, but it's that strategic input from government actually required us, obviously, all collectively within the industry, to move forward and invest competently within the built environment.
Mm-hmm. And Wes Earlham, Legal and General Capital, was in the news a few weeks ago after selling its stake in Media City, a move that you said at the time would enable investment in other projects. And you specialise in sectors where there might not be sort of such a great investment as well. How do you see the picture in the UK currently?
Thanks, Hugh. Yeah, I mean, we're incredibly as a business. You mentioned an investment that we recently traded out of, but that just reflects a kind of portfolio approach to what we do. We've got some investments that we're making consistently through our joint ventures. So Bruntwood SciTech is our life science and technology real estate business that some people may be aware of, and clearly been turbocharged by the pandemic. But we've secured a number of high-profile projects there. We were secured a preferred bidder status with the University of Manchester, which is a very long-term project of over £1 billion of GDV. And so, for us, it's about seizing the opportunities really that are out there and trying to impact right across the UK. And we tend to really try and use the capital that we're fortunate enough to have available through our customers and clients, and really make the deepest level of impact across all of the asset classes I mentioned earlier. We like to be around the UK. We don't like to just focus in specific areas. We've got lots of partnerships, and one of those is with Rob Allen and Muse Developments. But we think there are huge opportunities, and what we're trying to do really is to bring forward really high quality assets, really high quality investment opportunities, but also bring with that much more society impact. So make sure we're doing the right things in the locations where we're fortunate enough to work, and really involve the communities and the people who will be there for the long term in these projects. But we're enthused by the opportunities, but also not blind to the challenges, and not least the sustainability agenda, which certainly from a construction perspective is a huge challenge that we all face in terms of how we're going to manage our investment plans alongside those ambitious environmental targets.
Mm-hmm. And perhaps we'll come back to the sustainability shortly, but just to move on slightly in another or similar direction. But I mean, Matt Voice from Quintain, as you mentioned, done extensive work around the Wembley area, and that's probably what you're best known for. Would you say that construction cost inflation is the biggest risk at the moment in terms of investment in projects?
Well, I certainly say it's one of them. I think, if you talk to me about confidence for us to continue to develop, I would say that's in the balance, and we're probably in a similar situation to a number of developers where, if we're not careful, the industry is going to force us to hit the pause button on development. So, we've got to be mindful that we're not talking ourselves into, inflation, and, whilst there's been undoubtedly a shortage of materials as manufacturers rescale post-COVID, what we don't want to be doing is talking ourselves into a situation where, we're seeing, significant amounts of inflation going into cost consultants' quarterly reports, and all of a sudden the investment decisions are being made off the back of that. So I think it's finally in the balance. But look, we're still confident in build to rent. We're confident in what we are delivering at Wembley. Much needed homes for London. We still see London as an active, attractive place for people to come and work. And so we don't see any shortage there. I think there are other challenges other than the inflationary environment. I think we've got embodied carbon and net zero. I think operationally, as an owner operator, we're doing a lot in that space. But the embodied carbon in the actual materials and the construction is an area where I think we need manufacturers and industry to help us on that journey. There's no developer or investor on this panel that doesn't want to fully embrace sustainability and help everybody on this journey to net zero. But there's only so much we can do without some assistance from the outside market. So I'd say that's definitely an area. And then I know another one from the sort of construction angle would be Grenfell, and ultimately what comes out of the Grenfell inquiry. Lots of uncertainty around the stay put policy, what requirements are required from LFB, London Fire Brigade. So there's a lot of uncertainty around that. We're all guessing what we need to put into our buildings to future to ensure that they are, investable in years to come. So I would say those are definitely two areas, but we can't ignore inflation. But let's not talk it up.
Mm-hmm. And John Mulryan of fellow client Ballymore, do you have a similar perspective? Oh, I can't hear you, John. You're not on mute, are you?
There's always one, isn't there? Yeah, sorry. Yeah, so we're very London focused, and I think in terms of our in terms of investment, I mean, I think we very much focus on the London housing market and the London office market. I think, you know, on the housing side, I think, you know, one of the things that's been really encouraging in the last few months is we've seen incredible demand for rental accommodation in London again. And I think there was, you know, some challenges during COVID where I think the, you know, rents were dropping right across the city, some places worse affected than others. But that has rebounded pretty dramatically and shows, I think, in terms of fundamental housing need in the city, I think it shows that that, you know, that demand is there. I think on the supply side, for us, the biggest challenge is viability, and that's, you know, partly to things like construction costs. But in truth, I think possibly political uncertainty. I mean, housing is a very political topic, and we tend to see lots of policy changes happen year on year. Things like stamp duty changes, things like changes around taxation for buy-to-let landlords. You know, SIL 106 on the cost side, and also a kind of a target against kind of certain types of investors in the housing market, international investors. So I think I think, and this is probably specific to London as opposed to across the UK. I think that's where we see the challenges. I mean, we've got, you know, with the levels of affordable housing that are required, the levels of cost, as I said, 106 and SIL. Even though the demand is definitely there, trying to get a scheme that is affordable for buyers and make it viable is increasingly challenging. So I'd say that's our biggest challenge on the housing side, and that ultimately is kind of what kind of. And I think that for the office side, I think, you know, one of the things that I, you know, most big occupiers looking to either take new space or expand in London. You know, housing is also a big issue for them in terms of the cost of housing for people to be employed. And very often, you know, London is not necessarily competing with Leeds or Manchester or Birmingham. It's competing with New York and Hong Kong and places like that. And I think, so, you know, I think you know, I would say definitely viability and work, you know, and political, I suppose policy change driven by the political, you know, ambition to try and ultimately make homes more affordable. But that uncertainty creates challenges in terms of delivery.
Thanks, John. I touched on plans to build back greener at the start, and we've heard mention of the net zero and sustainability challenges. And the government has obviously got a big major net zero target. Lynn Smith from Europa Capital, is this target and the whole sustainability picture, is this helpful for investment now, or is it a barrier? And if it's the latter, what can be done to overcome that?
It's a really good question. I'm speaking from Glasgow, so we've obviously just had COP26 here for the last few weeks. Everybody's just left, so it's been really exciting for the city. And I'd say it's probably the biggest single issue we have in the real estate industry at the moment is net zero carbon. What do we do about it? How do we achieve our targets? I've spoken on this multiple times over the last few weeks, and as a business, I would say it's probably one of our number one priorities in terms of our net zero carbon strategy corporately, and also in how we integrate that into all our projects. And certainly for the past 12 months since I joined Europa Capital, that's been my priority, is to make sure that every single project we're doing for every investor, that we are ensuring resilience for them, to make sure that all our apartments are green and focus on well-being, sustainability for the occupiers, and creating a sense of community. And then in every single office project we have, we're targeting certification at the highest level we can get. So that's LEED Platinum, WELL Platinum, WiredScored Platinum, BREEAM Outstanding. And it's so important, and it comes back to cost as well. And what we were just discussing there is it's making sure that we build that in at day one, so we have sufficient contingency in for the unknown costs that come through as we're working our way through construction projects. There's always something, But it's also making sure that when we're doing the acquisition work and we are focusing in and running the numbers, that we actually build in sufficient capex budgets to make sure that everything we want to achieve for embodied carbon and sustainability is there from day one. And it's not an afterthought, because it shouldn't be an afterthought. For me, it's my number one priority. And we have to transition towards that quickly, and we have to do that efficiently as a real estate industry. And the only way we're going to be able to do it is acting together. So, I make a plea to anyone listening to this from the construction side, is that we're looking to you to help us achieve those targets and deliver that all the way through the life of a project, so that we start from, when we talk about it, the inception meetings, right through to when we're handing over to those occupiers, whether it's build to rent, senior living, an office occupier, whether it's a logistics user as well, because we have a phenomenal logistics portfolio across Europe as well. And it's having that conversation with those occupiers, and it's attracting them. And what we're finding, coming back to the earlier point there about the office market, is it's actually one of their number one concerns. Is you look at the FTSE 100, and 25% of those companies now have a net zero carbon target of 2030. That's not that long away. So we have to address that in the real estate industry and make sure that we are leading by example, I would say. So for us, it's hugely important.
Mm-hmm. Wes Earlham of Legal and General Capital. How are you seeing this issue at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, it's a priority for us, and it won't come as any surprise to hear that. I think what I think is helpful now is that we've got an emerging policy framework and policy drivers which are there to provide guidance. We've got a real groundswell of opinion around kind of corporate sustainability and leadership, and Lynn's alluded to that. We've got occupiers now voting with their feet, so wanting to move into space and using selection criteria for commercial offices, as John talked about, selecting the best quality accommodation, mindful of what their own colleagues and staff will expect on the sustainability front. And I guess the key response to that now is from the construction industry. So with all of that as a backdrop, and from an L&G perspective, we place it at the very top of our agenda. Are we able to then work with the construction industry and our contractors to bring forward projects that can respond to those needs, really? And I have to say, it's measured in so many different ways. I think we've still got quite a way to go to be able to meaningfully measure, because people use different numbers to look at ultimately the same output. So there needs to be some level of standardisation out there. But we really need the help of our construction colleagues, because all of the other things don't matter if we ultimately can't deliver the projects on the ground in the right manner. So I'm seeing really positive signs from the projects we're delivering, but we've got a long way to go in a short space of time.
Mm-hmm. And Robert Allen from Muse, one of your company's projects is in Salford, New Bailey, which has been dubbed the Hanging Gardens of Salford by a local councillor, because it's covered in 4,000 square metres of foliage, or it will be when it's delivered. So, and that, that's a big net zero project that's quite well known. Are you finding construction partners to be really helpful in enabling you to deliver these schemes?
I mean, I'd probably start off by echoing Wes's and Lynn's comments in terms of where we're at. I think it's a collective approach. I think, the Salford building's great. We have a living facade. I like the reference you mentioned earlier. You've got 350,000 plus plants will be on that building. And also, we all know what the benefits that does to well-being, biodiversity, cooling the building during the summer, making it better in the winter, keeping it warmer. But actually, one thing we need to be very careful is net zero carbon in operation. So we need the end users, whether it be in residential, we mentioned logistics, we mentioned build to rent, affordable. We all need to collectively work together. The construction industry has to play its part, and we have to challenge everything that we do to make sure we're spending money wisely, in the right pots effectively to deliver the development. Viability always comes back to the underlying principles behind it as well. you're right, Salford, we have spec built that building. We are pushing that forward. We don't have an occupier yet. I mean, the references made earlier today about flight to quality, that, occupiers will see, ESG is so high on their agenda that they will see the benefits of these kind of buildings coming forward. But we all have to work collectively to make sure they can physically happen. I mean, we've even up in Salford as well, that particular scheme, we're going to bring forward passive house certified affordable housing. Again, this is not an easy thing to do. This is something we are really pushing the boundaries on to make it happen. Now, I can't say we can do that on every single scheme that we do, but we are really trying hard to make sure that we can learn as much as we can to make sure that on the next scheme we do, can we do it better? Can we do it more efficiently? And everything becomes a learning process. But I would say, it is a true, when we refer to life cycle approach, it's all of us. It's the end user, it's the investor, it's how people finance a green finance initiative, it's the end fund owners, it's collectively, we all have to work together to make this happen.
Mm-hmm. And there's one question I know our viewers will be extremely keen to get some of the panel's view on, and Matthew Vickerstaff, you touched on it a little bit at the start. I wonder what you say contractors can and should be doing to enable clients, whether it be government or private, to make that investment. What are the key things that the IPA is looking for?
So I think, and apologies, my phone just went off, but I think you were talking about incentivizing private investors to invest. So the 650 billion pipeline that I talked about, that we have modelled moving out for the next 10 years, around 50% of that is privately financed. And I think increasingly we're seeing, especially for energy transition, in order to achieve net zero 2050, and even though that's only energy transition, a lot of what has been discussed here follows on from energy transition, especially if you get into transportation and logistics as well, because obviously for electronic vehicles, but also the stability and resilience of networks, especially if we go to heating, both commercial and residential buildings, then electricity will play its part as well. And in that area, we do have some really useful techniques which are internationally recognized and are very much investable. So going back to your original question, is the UK an attractive place to invest? Certainly our regulated asset-based model, so for our water utility companies, similarly for energy, and also in the past airports, which are now not regulated in the same way from a competitive basis because there is competition. But those models, and when you include contracts for difference and other feed-in tariff mechanisms, definitely are a really strong way of leveraging in private sector investment. And on things like carbon capture and storage, things like new nuclear, sustainable aviation fuel, hydrogen, zero emission vehicles, buses, all of those activities and areas are looking at subsidy-based mechanisms, either supported by the taxpayer or frankly by consumers, to encourage that net zero green efficient investment. And I'm pleased to say, certainly we do quite a lot of international work. Post the last general election, the uncertainty about things around nationalising utilities and private sector companies, that has largely gone away from institutional and international investors' perspectives. And the UK, particularly as we're doing pretty well, touch wood, recovering from COVID, from an economy and healthcare outcome perspectives, the UK looks a pretty attractive place to invest, I would say, and infrastructure and net zero based infrastructure. Just picking up on Lynn's point, we need to move the curve by 2030. If we don't get the gradient coming down towards that 2050 target, we cannot wait till beyond 2030. We need to move the needle and the direction of travel by that 2030 date. So there's a huge amount to do. I just reflect, there's a lot for us all to learn about measuring, monitoring, and also how we implement and deliver all these projects, whether it's housing, commercial, whether it's big infrastructure. There is just a collective learning exercise, which I include government myself, about how we monitor, how we kind of manage whole life carbon throughout the life of an asset, economic and overall lifetime. And that's a huge challenge for us, because that does come back to how we deliver it.
Mm-hmm. And John Mulryan from Ballymore, on those issues or any others that that are sort of a challenge for a client, what are you looking for contractors or subcontractors on projects to sort of be able to do to help add to your confidence in the delivery?
Well, I think on what are we looking for? I mean, I think it kind of, in a funny way, in terms of commercial development and the office market, I think it's a little bit easier, because I think in that sense you've got I think as someone mentioned earlier on, I mean, I think occupiers are now looking for best-in-class buildings. They're looking for buildings that are net zero carbon, and I think the market ultimately will provide that. There will be a cost to that, but there is that sense that the occupiers will pay a premium. They have their as was mentioned, their 2030 goals, and I think that will drive most office development over the next few years to a very, very sustainable place. I think housing is a bit more difficult in that it's not yet obvious that I suppose occupiers, buyers, leaseholders will necessarily pay a premium to achieve a higher level of I mean, I think a minority will. I'm not sure the majority will yet. And going back to another point that was made about I think this measurement of how buildings perform as well. I think that's something that, again, I think on commercial buildings and office buildings, generally you've got professionally managed buildings that and monitoring of them, just giving, they take up, you might have one occupier taking up a very large amount of space. So monitoring of that kind of space is more straightforward. There is very, very little research, or certainly that I'm aware of, being done to monitor and measure how certainly apartment buildings perform post-occupation. A lot of the work is very theoretical, and actually we manage our own buildings, and I think we find many of the tick box kind of measures that are put in place to meet sustainability criteria don't necessarily work as well in a true sustainable way. But I think one of the things I think of the construction industry, which I think is going to be really important as well, there is a tendency for everyone to think about new buildings and to think about how we build new, better buildings. But most of the buildings we occupy in 2030 already exist, and I think we can't put all of our best thinkers into how do we design the most efficient new build, because ultimately with embodied carbon, that is never going to be the lowest carbon way for us to move forward. So I think the brains of the industry, actually, if you're looking at bang for buck, I think we probably need to put a lot of thought into what we do with our older buildings, and how do we make them work harder and make sure that this race for the new build kind of a BREEAM outstanding net zero carbon building, that as I said, in a funny way, I think that's easier to achieve. I think the real challenge is our existing stock, and not forgetting about that, and coming up with ways that we can future-proof those buildings.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yes. And Matt Voice from Quintain, is that something that you're thinking about, and also generally, are there things in particular that you're hoping contractors can and should do to help you feel confident in future project investment?
Well, just to echo what John said, I think the current housing stock and how we deal with that is absolutely going to be a huge task for the industry. But I suppose all I can comment on is the is the new build, and I'm not sure I quite agree with John. Certainly have been on a journey of reducing embodied carbon, and our later plots that are currently on the drawing board are going to yield a 30 to 40% saving on embodied carbon to previous projects we've completed. But that's as far as we can go as a client without the industry helping us. So, we've put all the cement replacement we possibly can in without impacting on programs. So, getting to a point where we need the industry to help us. We've done our first application to GRESB, which has been a fantastic exercise for us as a business. Huge amount of heavy lifting by everybody. For anyone that's done an application to GRESB or that is part of that certification club.
Sorry, Matt. For any viewers that don't know what that is, what is?
I knew you were going to put me on the spot. I have to come back. I knew you were going to put me on the spot with that. But it's a recognised industry certification that goes across the whole of your business. So it touches on not only what you do from a development point of view. Or Lynn, maybe you can fill me.
I can help. I can help you out. I can help you out on that one. That's the Global Real Estate Sustainability Benchmark, and all of our funds are. We go through it every year, and all the investment houses go through it that are registered for that process. And it's an industry benchmark that's worldwide, and effectively it tells investors how well your fund is doing in terms of reaching sustainability targets. And it's he's right, it's a very heavy lift. Usually starts sort of April, May, June, and then the deadline is the end of June, and then the results are usually just announced. In fact, I think they were about 3 or 4 weeks ago. They weren't that long ago. We were very pleased with ours. We've increased our star rating again, and essentially it gives you a sort of roadmap how to get to 100%, I suppose, sustainable buildings, and you get points for various different things that you're carrying out. So if you're measuring your energy performance in a building, your electricity consumption, your gas consumption, your waste management, your water consumption, you get points for social engagement with your tenants, your community, etc., etc. And it's really great, and it can give you a pathway towards sustainable buildings, which is wonderful. And what is really good, I think, about it is, and Legal in General, I know they do it as well, all the big funds do, is it means that for an external investor looking at making a decision on where to put their money, they can have a reliable source of benchmarking across the entire industry, which is why everyone uses it. So it's great.
Thank you, Lynn. Spare my blushes.
You're welcome.
And so so Matt, that's been helpful. Oh, we just had a question from a viewer, which I'll have to ask very quickly. I think it's maybe in line with what John was saying. Someone watching has asked, with the concerns around carbon emissions and decarbonising in particular, do you think we'll see a significant increase in retrofit and cut and carve type jobs? Does anyone have a strong view on that?
Can I take that one, actually? Can I take that? Because I would say that, we're on our value add fund number 6, and we've been deploying approximately £500 million there across the UK and Europe, and we've been buying build to rent. But in terms of our office portfolio, a lot of it has in fact been retrofit, and we've been looking at value add propositions there where we can buy an existing building and then make do and mend with what we've got, repurposing M&E equipment that doesn't need to be thrown away, but we're maybe just replacing pieces of the bits of it, and maintaining the fabric of the building, maintaining the structure, calculating and keeping our embodied carbon that we've already got in that building, and then working that through the process with a view to transitioning it through and aiming for net zero carbon. We all know that's physically almost impossible to do, because at the end you always have a little element of offsetting at the end, and everyone always forgets about that. But that's that is one of our main focuses for the next sort of 12 to 18 months, is looking at retrofitting and repurposing. We have just bought a project in Paris, a 1920s building, and we're about to do that, and that will be our first net zero carbon project, working with a lot of really impressive companies in France to do that.
Fascinating. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I'm afraid that is all the time we have in this session. Thanks to all of you on the panel for joining us. I feel like there's a lot more we could talk about, and I'm sure some of those themes will be picked up in our other sessions, both later today and in person next week at the Leonardo Royal London in Tower Bridge. And we went through the whole thing, barely mentioned the pandemic, which is quite interesting, from where we were when the Prime Minister made that speech last year to now. Quite the change. Thank you very much, everyone, and thanks everyone for watching.
Thanks for having us.